Hey, peace and blessings. It's your brother. Sorry, back with yet another one. Um, Peace to the ancestors. Yeah, I mean, love all y'all, miss all y'all. Appreciate your contributions and the I don't know, the foundation that you laid. From the patriarchs of our various families to our collective cultural ancestors and stuff like that that paved the way for many of us on a collective level. I mean, there are different groups amongst us, so I mean, everybody kind of different people come to mind, but um, peace to the ancestors. Appreciate everything. Um, Peace to the true and living. You know what I mean? A great man once said, the helping hand that you're looking for is often at the end of your own arm. So it's kind of gonna be kind of like the topic of what we gonna get into today. But peace to the true and living, peace to the gods, peace to the young gods. I mean, definitely peace to the young gods. Um, Peace to the elder gods. Thankful for the elder gods. Um, and those in between. You know what I mean? That's my generation. You know what I mean? So we're gonna get into this. Um, the topic today is gonna be the reflective nature of consciousness and the bioetheric feedback loop. But this is a particular section. This is a like I said, we're filtering this through a slightly different framework, um, but it's basically inspired by the experiential. But in this section of the framework, others to self as opposed to self, this is going to be the bioetheric reflection principle. So, like how we talked about on previous videos, that the divination for the experiential are called reflections. There's a reflection principle in the experiential. And in future videos, we're going to kind of get into the self to self variant of this, what we're talking about here. This is the others to self variant of the reflection principle. It's going to say the same thing, just in a different language. So we're going to get into this. Okay. The bioetheric feedback loop. So that's this framework that we came up with. Um, Not to bog this video down with the review of what that is and everything like that, visit all the numerous videos that we've done in regards to the same topic or whatever, and you'll kind of see what we mean. Okay, bioetheric feedback loop provides a precise electrodynamic framework for analyzing complex psychological phenomena, treating consciousness as a localized electrical vortex interacting with the universal ether. So in this model, again, we're assuming, not even assuming, but we're operating off Robert Becker's research. We operating off the understanding that the body is electrical. The cells and proteins of the body function like semiconductors, and when we carry that over into Tesla's work, because that's whose electrical framework that we're using, we're not dealing so much with electrons, we're dealing more so with fields. And with that, instead of the transfer of particles, we're dealing more so with the idea of resonance, um, in a sense. So that's kind of where that comes in at. Tesla didn't believe in electrons. Tesla dealt with the luminiferous ether. You see what I'm saying? So that's kind of like the nature of our framework, kind of how we're approaching this. Applying this framework redefines concepts of self-reflection, dualism, manifestation, and transcendence as functions of energy flow, impedance or resistance, and coherence within the closed loop system, right? So like how we said in the previous video, coherence is the baseline to voltage, to increase the voltage and everything like that. So basically, yeah, we're gonna keep going into this. The reflective nature of consciousness, the bioetheric reflection principle, the psychological observation that how you feel about others reflects how you feel about yourself. Now, we spent quite a bit of time on that in the self-to-self portion when we were talking about honoring yourself and kind of going deeper down the rabbit hole as far as that, the ego, the principle, the ego, and the agent. And all of that is that's more self-to-self and more experientially driven or what have you. So we're gonna kind of use this framework to kind of illustrate that same thing or what have you. How you feel about your others reflects how you feel about yourself, right? Is a direct correspondence of the bioetheric feedback loops function as a continuous self referencing electromagnetic system. Okay, so how you feel about other people is how you feel about yourself. That this is the beginnings of this feedback loop that we're talking about. This is another aspect of this feedback loop. In the bioetheric feedback loop model, the internal state of the subject, the localized electrical vortex, or the soul, or the blueprint in this model, assuming that the soul is an electrical phenomenon, right? A la Pascal Beverly Randolph, that was one of the first people that kind of introduced that idea. The soul is the localized the localized electrical vortex. Soul possesses a specific state of coherence, or conversely, etheric torsion, unresolved electrical instability. Okay, that's what is defining etheric torsion as. The conscious continuity broadcasts this state into the external etheric field via the fractal antenna function of the mitochondrial DNA. Okay, so in the bioetheric feedback loop model, the internal state of the person, how you feel, um, the localized electrical vortex soul blueprint possesses a specific state of coherence, or conversely, etheric torsion, unresolved electrical instability. Okay, the consciousness continually broadcasts this state into the external etheric field via the fractal antenna, the mitochondrial DNA. So basically, how you feel is broadcasted, reflected back to the blueprint. Remember the soul, we're dealing with the soul as if it as the electrical blueprint or what have you on the server. It's an etheric vortex in another phase of the energy or what have you. You see what I'm saying? Um, Similar to we likened it to a server in another dimension, so to speak. If you destroy your phone a million times or whatever, you'll still get another. You can still get another one, and as long as you have the information backed up, you can always restore that same information in a new phone, whatever the case may be. So basically, how you feel is explaining how you feel is transferred back to the blueprint as a signal. Okay, projection, internal unresolved emotional states, incoherent electrical patterns are actively projected outward by the ego, right? Unresolved emotional states, incoherent electrical patterns are actively projected outward by the ego, right? So we talked about everything that you feel um, is uh, I don't know, in the traditional model, everything that you feel is becomes a chemical reality in the blood or whatever. But also, it can equally be said that everything that you feel is an electrical reality within this system as well. So the output signal shapes the local ether. Resonant return. So the first step is projection. The internal unresolved emotional state, incoherent electrical patterns are actively projected outward by the ego. The ego projects it outward. Oh man, this some BS. Okay, this output signal shapes the local ether. Okay, resonant return. The universal ether being a continuous, dynamic, and resonant material. Resonance. You see what I'm saying? It's gonna take on the vibration of whatever you put out, basically what he's saying, what is being said. And resonant medium immediately generates a resonant return pattern. You see what I'm saying? So when how you feel is being projected out into the ether, so to speak, um, through the medium of your DNA as an antenna. You see what I'm saying? And the ether resonates with the frequency that you put out. Okay, reflection, the perceived other or object because we're going to talk about the subject-object divide. That's something that Brother Naju talks about in the experiential, and honestly, that's one of the bases of the reflection technique to collapse the subject-object divide. You see what I'm saying? So that it's only one thing, kind of like how we've been talking about. So projection, resonant return, reflection. The perceived other or object becomes a temporary structure within the resonant return field. Becomes a temporary structure within the resonant return field. They appear to possess the attributes of the subject's internal electrical turmoil or coherence, right? So this is the mechanism of kind of like feeling a certain kind of way and then drawing things to you. Like I said, in this model of physics, period, we're dealing with resonance. So in Tesla's model, you have, it's less of a thing where you have electrons, little BBs going from point A to point B. It's more of a thing of resonance. And you have longitudinal waves, something that's outside of the electromagnetic spectrum, something that travels faster than the speed of light and cannot be measured with um, you know, our common equipment and everything like that. You're dealing with resonance, and point A resonates at a particular frequency, and point B catches that resonance and everything like that. Something of that nature. Let me see here. This process forms the bioetheric reflection principle, where the external world acts as a responsive field that provides constant feedback, validating the core electrical structure of the self. So the environment, once again, we get back into the environment. This process forms the bioetheric reflection principle, where the external environment acts as a responsive. Remember in the experiential, we spoke about the reflexive nature of reality. So the external world acts as a responsive field that provides constant feedback, a la the feedback loop, validating the core electrical structure of the self. The conscious experience is thus a mirror reflecting the coherence level of the soul vortex, confirming the saying that the exterior is merely the interior made visible. Now, when we get into more of the self to self material, a lot of this stuff, when we step away from this others to self, we got some more videos to do on others to self. But when we finally step away from it and go back into the experiential, it's going to, the stuff we go talk about in the experiential is going to have a little bit more weight to it. When we get into, let's say, like the experiential, um, let's say like, or self to self in general, human beings are in trance 100% of the time. So a lot of times when I don't know if you recall on a previous video, I was saying that a lot of times when you're talking, when you're entranced and you're talking about somebody, and you're talking about somebody that you don't like, or whatever case may be, when you collapse the subject object divide, everything about the person that you don't like is actually, you're talking about yourself. Man, that such ain't nothing. That's such gotta do. That's such. When you examine it from a thematic perspective or what have you, how we talking about acausal connections. That's what Carl Jung talked about, acausal connections. When we're getting back into themes, remember we were saying that the themes are kind of like the raw form of this psychological material, the raw form of the unconscious material that's floating around in the collective unconscious, stable etheric vortex, or the archetypes in particular, or whatever, but the unconscious material, what have you, is the information within the ether, or the so-called Akashic records, and the ether is called the Akasha. So, you know, just kind of like making that particular correlation. Um, yeah, so yeah, so when we get back into the experiential material and everything like that, you'll we really get into the reflective nature of consciousness. Okay, so moving right along, the ego as the guardian of the subject object divide. Okay, the ego in the bioetheric feedback framework is not merely a psychological construct, not merely a psychological construct. Remember how we were saying that the ego is sentient? We were saying that we seek to attain the powers, the full power of the mind. The ego already has the full power of the mind. You see what I'm saying? So, The true self is sentient. What we call in the soul is sentient. The ego is sentient. You see what I'm saying? The patterns, these stable etheric vortexes or whatever case may be, all this stuff is sentient. As if you go back into some of the videos when we talking about self to self, you'll see how we discuss these things. The deeper down the rabbit hole videos, you see how they're discussed. When you're actually dealing with this stuff, you're dealing with it from a perspective of it being sentient. But on paper, like what we're doing now, on paper, when it's like it comes across like this: the ego in the bioetheric feedback loop framework is not merely a psychological construct, but a necessary dielectric impedance layer. Okay, so it's basically a layer of resistance. It basically absorbs charge. Basically, what it's saying, that creates the experience of dualism, right? So it's an insulator and um, a layer of resistance. That's how it's basically styling the ego in this model. Okay, ego formation as electrical boundary. The ego originates from surface differentiation, where the nascent self separates its internal sensations, memories, and feelings, introjected from the external world, projected electrodynamically. This differentiation is the establishment of a defined resistant boundary between the localized electrical soul vortex blueprint and the infinite universal ether object. Okay, so remember how we were saying that the ego is kind of like a deformed version of the true self, kind of like a variant of it, kind of like a deformed version that kind of bought into this whole um literal reality thing or whatever case may be. It's a sentient aspect of self that kind of is a mutant version of the self that kind of is heavily influenced and enthralled with the physical world or whatever case may be. Okay, so that's kind of what we're talking about, is surface differentiation and everything like that, based on the memories, sensations, and feelings that what you like or what you feel like you like or whatever from the projected from the external world and everything like that. It's not the original self. You see what I'm saying? I think it's a video where I posed a question to Naju. What is the person talking to? What is the person in the mirror talking? Who is that? Who is the person in the mirror talking? He said, that's the ego. You see what I'm saying? That's not necessarily the true self. That's the ego talking, or whatever case may be, because it's a conglomerate of all your feelings, the stuff you like, the stuff you dislike, or you feel like you like or you dislike. But that's not necessarily this original blueprint. Okay, subject and the okay. So the ego acts as the window, screen, or surface, mediating this division. Its energetic function is to ensure physical survival in linear space-time. Linear space-time. Remember, I like how Eric Dollard was talking about a charge flows through a wire forward. So that's the idea of the forward progression in time, or whatever case may be. But time basically is viewed from this framework as a side effect. You see what I'm saying? Of everything vibrating at its own particular point of inception to expiration and everything like that. So it's a physical, it's a mechanism to, it's a energetic function is to the the energetic function of the ego is to ensure physical survival in linear space-time by imposing a state of high electrical resistance or impedance, right, to the flow of information from the non-local ether. So it's basically a governor. Remember, we talked about that on previous videos. Go back to the video where I talk about a foundational method that anyone can use for personal benefit. And I'm talking about listening to your first mind. And I'm going into Courtney Brown's book on remote viewing and everything like that. And I'm talking about the substrate that separates your conscious mind, or what we have access to as far as our conscious level of awareness and everything like that, versus what remote viewers access as far as beyond some other boundary or substrate. They have access to all information or what have you, details of situations and things that they should not know or what have you. Similarly, um, astrologers have a similar level of access. Um, so there's some sort of substrate or barrier between you being omniscient and you being John Smith. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so um, let's see here. Impedance, the free flow of information from the non-local ether. The ego is the component that restricts the infinite bandwidth. Infinite bandwidth. Right now, as human beings, we have a finite amount of bandwidth. It's only so much stuff we can pay attention to at one time. You see what I'm saying? And then we're gonna start losing parts of our attention span has limits and everything like that. Our the amount of stuff we can focus on has limits. Okay, so the ego is the component that restricts the infinite bandwidth of pure awareness, filtering it into the limited frequency range required for linear perception. So the ego is what filters this into the limited frequency range that we can perceive as human beings, and that makes you John Smith, Sarah Jackson, whatever that makes you. Okay, thus functioning as a regulatory filter of subconscious drives and feelings, the physical aura acting as an energetic membrane. Physical aura acting as an energetic membrane. Remember, we said that if the aura is the grass, the melanin is the soil that the grass is growing out of. You see what I'm saying? The physical aura acting as the energetic membrane further enforces this impedance barrier, protecting the localized self from the external field, right? So the physical aura is another layer or whatever. We likened this whole time we've been talking about um, your own personal field versus the field of your environment, right? So your own personal field, we liken that to the natal chart, a person's natal chart in astrology versus the transiting chart, the external field or what have you. So let's see here. Now, it's something that this calls canonian causality as a self-sustaining torsion loop, right? What it's referring to is canonian causality. Is referring to this thematic current that runs through several different seemingly unrelated events. And if this theme is satisfied or balanced in a particular way, then that'll be the difference between a favorable experience and an unfavorable experience in the various situations. If you examine each of the situations, similar to how we did, go back to the video on the mean meaning exercise from the experiential. That's an example of how you can generate this phenomenon in your own life and kind of view it. Um, it operates very similar to the whole idea of doing waking dream interpretations or what have you, but it's a little bit different when you take various different situations and you can kind of see the theme that strings them together or whatever. So that's kind of what this is talking about. So canonian causality. And I think this is kind of like a bridge off of something that Carl Jung talks about. Because like I said, he discusses a little bit causal connections and things. So canonian causality describes how unresolved psychological issues manifest through recurring, stressful life events. Unresolved psychological issues manifest through recurring stressful life events. Remember, we have a whole video, a few videos on the language of situations. The language of situations is something is a terminology coined for this material, and it talks about how the self or the soul in this particular context here, the blueprint, communicates not in words that like how we do, but it communicates in situations, circumstances, in environmental symbolism, archetypes, and things of that nature. So the various things that we seeing or what have you, the various aspects of this feedback loop, right, are the various modes of communication, or language as far as can be perceived on our side. They manifest to us as life events that reinforce the original internal conflict or whatever in this particular case. So canonian causality describes how unresolved psychological issues manifest through recurring stressful life events that reinforce the original internal conflict. The bioetheric feedback loop models this as a persistent destructive feedback loop driven by etheric torsion, or I think it's basically dissonance. Okay, so internal torsion, unresolved psychological issues, deep-seated self-criticism, or persistent patterns of electrical instability, etheric torsion, superimposed upon the blueprint or soul vortex, field emission. The torsion signal is continuously amplified and broadcast into the local reality via the somatic interference, melanin, fascia, mitochondrial DNA. So when there's torsion created, so basically it's a back and forth type thing. You communicate to the self or the blueprint, it communicates back to you or whatever case may be. So the your unresolved psychological issues or whatever are communicated to the blueprint through your DNA and the electrical aspects thereof, and the blueprint communicates back through that same DNA to your fascia, your melanin and all that. In previous videos, we talked about the analytics of a fight viewed through True Master. We talked about illnesses and things that come out because of psychological imbalances and everything like that, situations that manifest in your life as a result of that. All of this stuff is basically coming out of your nervous system. You see what I'm saying? Regardless of I don't know who you pray to. that as we get into some of this, that becomes fairly irrelevant. So these psychological issues or whatever you go through or whatever case may be, based on this feedback loop, they manifest as situations, as physical illnesses, as psychosis, as patterns of people that you meet in your life, all types of things of that nature. So moving right along, manifestation. This is the third section. So internal torsion, field emission. Internal torsion, that's the chaotic, unresolved psychological situation. Field emission, that is the broadcasting into the melanin and the fascia. Manifestation, the projected torsion field restructures the local probability matrix, drawing the external circumstances, the stressful life events such as conflict-ridden relationships or career setbacks, right? That perfectly resonate with and validate the original internal emotional state. How you feel about other people is how you feel about yourself, and how you feel about yourself is your most important relationship. So let's go back over that manifestation thing. Okay, the projected torsion field restructures the local probability matrix, right? Similar to how Jacobo Grimberg was talking about. He referred to it as a lattice, but it's the same thing. It's just basically the ether, and the ether has a resonant quality to it, a reflective quality to it. Okay, so drawing in external circumstances, the stressful life events, all right, such as conflict-ridden relationships or okay, so projected torsion field restructures the local probability matrix, drawing in basically how you feel, projects it back on the matrix, drawing in external situations, stressful events such as conflict-ridden relationships or career setbacks that perfectly resonate with and validate the original internal emotional state. Causal feedback. The individual perceives the external event as the individual perceives. Now, Drew always says there are no such thing as isolated events, right? The individual perceives the external event as the cause, right? You don't see the theme behind it. The theme is hiding. The theme is hiding behind numerous events or whatever the case may be. You never see the string of a causal connection or the canonian causes is talking about. The individual perceives the external event as the cause, which then reinforces the internal issue, right? The survival mechanism of patterns, right? the pattern is viewed. You see them. You don't see the true cause of it. The highest leverage point. E.g., I'm okay. So you might perceive the cause as you being a failure. That might reinforce the original torsion or whatever case may be, completing a circular, self-reinforcing causal loop. So the individual perceives the external event as the cause, which then reinforces the internal issue, right? About you being a failure, you just can't get right. Completing a circular, self-reinforcing causal loop. The system operates on a complex circular causality where the internal emotional state and the external environment continually co-create each other. Let's say that again. The system operates on a complex circular causality where the internal emotional state and the external environment continuously co-create each other. So yeah. So uh, you know how we talked about on the previous video, will is a very important thing or what have you, but you also have to understand why you want the things that you want. You see what I'm saying? So from an astrology perspective or what have you, you may be predisposed to wanting certain things or what have you. And you may feel like that's what you want, and what I'm saying, I got the power to change my destiny or whatever case may be, however. And that may very well be the case, but you may be pulling against the wrong thing or making adjustments in the wrong places. The things that you may see as the cause, when you examine the theme, the cause may be something a little bit different. And the theme may actually line up with some of the themes in your natal chart. So that's just food for thought. Okay, so the system operates on a complex circular causality where the internal emotional state and the external environment continuously co-create each other. Correcting canonian causality requires therapeutically dismantling the sustained internal torsion rather than attempting to linearly control the external effects. You see what I'm saying? You cussing your boss, your job, you cursing your boss out on every job that you get fired from. You've been getting fired for the last 10 years from job after job after job. So the solution every time, the common denominator is you, but the solution every time is that you gotta cuss your boss out and straighten him. You know what I'm saying? Maybe that's not the theme at play there. Maybe less is more for you. You see what I'm saying? Maybe it's some other theme, or maybe the adjustment can be made some other place where the pattern goes away completely, or whenever that comes up. Remember, in the experiential and others to and self to others, we were talking about proper and improper responses to energy, right? So all of this kind of bleeds back in. So let's talk about something. I talked about this. You'll probably have to go back some years. Um, to hear me talk about this. Um, Solipsism, right? So solipsism, those who kind of practice the experiential, solipsism is a potential danger of some of that information. Um, so let's get into it. Okay, so the ultimate status of the subject-object divide reveals the difference between two maximal states of self-confinement and self-realization, right? Solipsism and non-dual transcendence, right? So the concepts, okay, solipsism, maximal impedance, maximum resistance. Basically, you're confining yourself. I think that's one of the 48 laws of power that we went over. You're confining yourself and you're walling yourself off. So you feel like you're the only one here, right? The ego, believing only its experience can be verified. Mistakes, its highly bounded, localized electrical field for the totality of the ether. It is the extreme perfection of the dualistic view, where the isolated I thought is centralized and absolute. You see what I'm saying? The ego assumes that it is the only one here. The ego mistakes itself for the blueprint itself and says, hey, I'm the only one here. Everything is in me, right? Okay, the self is trapped within its own maximal filtering mechanism, right? Because we talked about the ego it's basically resistance. You see what I'm saying? Eternally enclosed by its own impedance layer. Okay, so the okay, so in contrast to that, you'll have something called transcendence, and this ties into non-duality, right? So this is zero impedance. So you go from you have the two extremes. Solipsism is maximum impedance, and then you go to transcendence. Remember we talked about transcendence because we're in trance 100% of the time. So zero impedance, boundary dissolution, right? The soul vortex blueprint achieves absolute etheric continuity. Its distinction between the perceiving self and the perceived phenomenon dissolves. So this is the dissolution of the subject-object divide, right? The ego's impedance layer vanishes, and the localized structure realizes its intrinsic, non-separated nature as a standing wave within the universal field. Pure awareness, transcendence expands the self beyond the ego's definition into the interconnected web of existence. Remember, I said the ego is very exclusive. You see what I'm saying? It's cordoned off the section where it's just you and your partners in the section. The soul or the true self is very inclusive. It's like, when Dave Chappelle was doing the parody of Rick James, he got the orange aura like, come on in. You feel me? So that's the soul. So we have that contrast yet again. Um, okay, so acausal connections and ego transcendence, right? So remember we said acausal connections, that's something that Carl Jung kind of talks about. But acausal connection, that's going back to that meaning exercise out of the experiential. Acausal connections are connections that are based on the theme. Remember, at the raw aspect of this stuff is more thematic. In astrology, they deal with themes. Even Plato's theory of forms, which we have a whole video for that that we gonna do. Plato's theory of forms. He's still talking about um, larger um, I don't know, broader categories. It's always that kind of way when we're talking about the source of the field or the ether or stuff like that. We filter it down to specificity. I think they called particulars in that particular thought process. But acausal connections and ego transcendence, the recognition of acausal connections, such as the interpretation of a synchronicity or waking dream interpretation, right? That's a form of recognition of a causal connection. Acts as a mechanism for temporarily bypassing the ego's impedance and facilitating transcendence. So just recognizing things like that, basically, like I was talking about, it kind of initiates or gives you a glimpse of that psychoactive state, because what it actually does, it puts your logical left brain um, thought process face to face with some of this abstract stuff that should not exist from a linear left brain perspective. And it forces you to have some sort of third type of perspective or whatever case may be. That's what this is that's the beginnings of what this is calling transcendence. And we have a whole nother video where we talk about that. The video about the Bardos and all that, where we talk about that, and we talk about how observing or interpreting waking phenomena in the sense of a dream interpretation, it kind of forces your brain into certain states that you would get into when you are actually dreaming. It forces you to consciously dial down all the literalness of your environment and kind of focus simultaneously on the abstractness of it as well. So acausal connections as field resonance. Synchronicity is defined as an acausal connecting principle. Synchronicity, you see what I'm saying? Um, you thinking about somebody and they calling you, okay, is defined as an acausal connecting principle where an internal psychological state, i.e. a thought or a conflict, coincides meaningfully with an external event without a clear causal chain, right? Just like what we said. You thought about Aunt Minnie and she called you, or something like that. In the bioetheric feedback loop, this is understood as a moment of instantaneous, non-linear, non like how we doing it, point A to point B type thinking, non-linear field resonance. The subject's internal field structure achieves a momentary fractal match. What? Fractal match with a comprehensive, meaningful pattern embedded in the universal ether, bypassing the constraints of linear causality and time. Okay, let's go back over that. Okay, the subject's internal field structure achieves a momentary. This is when your you thought about your auntie and she called you. The subject its internal field structure achieves a momentary fractal match. Then we say we're dealing with resonance in Tesla's framework. Fractal match with the comprehensive, meaningful pattern embedded in the universal ether, bypassing the constraints of linear causality and time. Ain't that what Brother Assar been talking about for the past 6 years? Real talk. And that what Brother Naju been talking about for since the 90s. You see what I'm saying? The same thing. So just filtering it through a different framework, a slightly different language that we get into. Okay, the conscious recognition and interpretation of this meaningful coincidence. Meaningful coincidence. So that's how people write it off. You see what I'm saying? That's how we've been taught to write it off as a coincidence. But as you explore this, you see what I'm saying? We see that that there are no such things as coincidences if this be true, right? So the conscious recognition and interpretation of this meaningful coincidence provides direct, undeniable experimental proof that the subject's internal life is isomorphic with the external world. Experimental proof, because remember, didn't I say a scientist, the layman, the philosopher, the scientist, and the artist? Remember, didn't Brother Sar tell you that the scientist has a duplicatable method that they can test this off of? And doesn't this make that, what I'm saying, fairly duplicatable? Okay, then this realization results in a momentary ego boundary collapse. Then we say that that's a part of what Brother Naju has as far as the experiential and his whole thing. Ego boundary collapse, a transient but profound reduction in the electrical impedance layer, right? This influx of non-dual information, no subject and object, no separation. It's only one thing, brother. So I've been saying that. Okay, enhances consciousness and psychological resilience by experiencing the shared pattern of the inner psyche and the outer world. The individual, didn't I say when I was describing reflections, didn't I say it could be 100 people in the room and you do a reflection for one person, and whatever is true for that one person, it'll thematically apply to everybody, all 100 of the people in the room in the presence of the reflection, because they're observing it, and nature has a reflective quality. Let the church say amen. By experiencing the shared pattern of the inner psyche and the outer world, the individual practices the state of low impedance necessary for ultimately transcending the dualistic subject object divide. Oh no, we ain't done. Okay, part two. The ego and the subject object divide as etheric impedance. The psychological construct of the ego must be modeled as a electrodynamic boundary condition within the bioetheric feedback loop framework to bridge the physics and the phenomenology, right? To bridge the physics and the phenomenology. Okay, modeling the subject object divide in etheric space, right? Ego formation as spatial differentiation, electrical interpretation. The ego is psychoanalytically understood as a consequence of surface differentiation. We said that, where the id influence, because in Freud's model, you have the ego id in the ego id and super id. Excuse me, the ego id, super id. I'm tripping. Ego, the ego id and super ego. Excuse me. Okay, ego, like what we talked about. The id is the instinctual survival aspect of the mind, or whatever, like the baser instincts or whatever. And the super ego is, for lack of a better way of putting it, I know somebody with a psychology degree is gonna correct me, but the super ego is basically damn near this omniscient aspect of mind. So influenced by external reality, motivated by perception, develops a distinction between what is internal, introspected, and external, projected. The ego operates as the window or screen between the two worlds. Like we said, in electro-etheric paradigm, the ego development is fundamentally a process of electrodynamic localization, right? The initial state of etheric unity, the id, universal ether, to establish individuality and interact with reality. The ego's role, the localized soul vortex must define stable, separate boundaries. This boundary is modeled as a dielectric barrier. Remember, we said an insulator or some form of resistance. Okay, um, that separates the subject's coherent internal field from the universal ether. Remember how we talk about there's a decoupling of the field from its semiconductor upon death or whatever. And we talk when we were talking about the Bardo states, we were talking about how in the, I think, the Bardo of Dharmata, you're actually interacting with the fullness of the ether. So people have all these, it translates as the releasing of all these archetypes, and you have whatever you believe in. That's when you're going to see the angels, the demons, Allah, whatever you believe in. You see what I'm saying? Um, Again, we're styling this. It's no disrespect to anybody's religion, but we're styling this as an electrical phenomenon so we can get certain nuances out of it. Okay, so the consequence of establishing this boundary is the introduction of increased resistance. The ego would suggest increased resistance or impedance to the free flow of energy and information between the localized vortex and the infinite field. So remember, Brother Asar was telling you that all of this stuff that we're talking about, it has an experiential counterpart. It's what it looks like on paper, like what we talking about, and it's how, and then the way it looks, we're observing it like on paper, but we're also in it and we're experiencing it. So when it talks about when we talk about, let's say, like this barrier, oh man, Courtney Brown was talking about in his remote viewing book, he's talking about a substrate that separates the conscious level of intellect from an omniscient level of intellect or what have you. Now that's from an experimental perspective, that's how it looks on paper, but as we can see here, a form of that in our everyday experience is the ego, the I-ness, me. Your identity as John Smith and Sarah Jackson is a form of separation between you and the ether at large, as it were, according to this. So moving right along. Okay, this impedance layer is the structural definition of dualism. The structural definition of dualism. It creates that. The experience of separation, the subject-object divide, is directly proportional to the electrical resistance sustained by the ego boundary. So in this, we're just exploring this so we can understand what the ego is and everything like that. So when we reflect back on other information that's already been laid down, it kind of makes it make more sense. I'm not saying that, you shouldn't have your own identity in things or what have you, but I'm just illustrating this. We're just offering this for contrast. So you see the value of having your own identity versus the value of what that identity actually is and what it represents and what it I don't know, it serves as somewhat of a boundary, as we see. But the ego as guardian and frequency filter, right? The ego's function is to ensure that instinctual drives are expressed in a manner acceptable to the world, and to filter subconscious activity that is not merely an abstract regulatory role. It is the necessity for physical survival in a linear space-time. We feeling like time is moving forward because electricity moves forward through circuits. Okay, the soul vortex, that's the forward progression of time. The soul vortex or blueprint, operating as pure awareness, likely functions as a transcendental, non-local, non-physical coherence level. Okay, remember we were saying on a previous video that the soul or exists on the causal realm, as they say, or we liken that to being something electrical as we would perceive it, or energetic electrical, but on a different phase of energy that we physically don't have access to, right? This level of information is incomparable with the localized decision-making apparatus required for daily life. The ego impedance layer acts as a sophisticated frequency filter. So the ego is viewed as a frequency filter, right? It steps down the infinite bandwidth. So it it reduces the bandwidth, right? Into you being Sarah Jackson. You feel me? Or Steve Smith or Paul Nelson, whatever. I'm making up names. But shout out to you if I use your name in that analogy. However, it steps down the infinite bandwidth and high order coherence of the soul's original signal into a limited frequency range, the particular incarnation, or whatever case may be. The constrained bandwidth necessary for conscious perception, i.e., the maximal 10 bits of active conscious information observed in neuroscience, right? You only have so many bits of bandwidth before you start losing information and stuff like that. So you basically had to come down into that versus having unlimited, infinite bandwidth. As the um, Akashic records in the Akasha, aka the ether, right? So this filtering mechanism is essential for linear self-identification. It is the physical act of restricting the signal that effectively establishes the subject by suppressing the continuous flow of information that will reveal the subject's underlying unity. There's only one thing. We've been saying that on several different videos. So field operations, projection, introjection, and maintenance. Projection and introjection is field operations to maintain the ego's dielectric boundary and manage internal field pressures. The system utilizes field operations. Uh, Introjection is the assignment of sensations, memories, and feelings to the internal world. Conversely, projection is the actively externalization of internal field imbalances, right? So introjection and projection of field operations, or what have you. So, okay, so when the localized blueprint soul vortex generates internal incoherence, right? Such as unresolved psychological conflicts or dissonant um, electrical conflicts. The ego's structure often cannot integrate those within the defined self boundary. Projection is the okay. So this what I'm about to read, right? This is what I'm about to read. Think about somebody maybe if this is the section of it. If it's not, I'll bring this back up. But think about somebody who may have been abused or something like that. All right, when I read this, when the localized soul vortex generates internal incoherence, such as unresolved psychological conflicts or dissonant electrical patterns, some form of abuse or something, maybe a child or something of that nature. The ego's structure often cannot integrate these within the defined self boundary. Projection is the process where the internal dissonant electrical patterns are actively transmitted outward onto the universal ether, the environment, or other individuals via the bioetheric feedback loop, output loop, specifically utilizing the mitochondrial DNA fractal antenna as a high gain transmitter of incoherent field information, right? I don't remember what that character was in Looney Tunes. Might have been the skunk or whatever case might be. He would have a gray cloud hanging over him everywhere he went. It would be raining on him and stuff like that, something like that. The result is that the external perceived object appears to possess the attributes of the subject's internal electrical turmoil. Basically, they're drawing negative situations, negative patterns to themselves. They've set themselves, they're frequency locked or phase locked, how we talked about in the previous video, in that frequency of negativity or whatever psychological trauma has been created for them or whatever, be via that abuse or whatever case may be, and it locks them in a particular range of patterns. Okay, reflective consciousness and resistance matching. The bioetheric reflection principle, the psychological principle that how you feel about others reflects how you feel about yourself, is a direct consequence of the bioetheric feedback loop's electrodynamic function, formalized here as the bioetheric reflection principle. Given Tesla's assertion that the ether is simultaneously the perceiver and the perceived, the external environment is not fundamentally separate, but a structure. The external environment is not fundamentally separate, right? And we, over these past few videos, we've seen how the environment affects us, right? But a structural extension of the localized soul vortex blueprints structured field output. Your external environment is not fundamentally separate, but it's a structural extension of the localized soul structured field output, or whatever the case may be. So even the place that you are located in, the place that you're located in physically, is a reflection of how you feel about yourself. You see what I'm saying? It's an aspect of the reflection of how you feel about yourself, even down to that, where you live, the all these various things, or whatever case may be, all that contributes to it. The subject's ego structure determines the harmonic state, coherence or incoherence, projected outward. The universal ether, being a continuous and resonant medium, responds by generating immediate resonant return patterns, right? The objective reality encountered is therefore a closed loop electrical validation of the subject's internal energetic state. A fragmented, incoherent electrical vortex projects dissonant and resulting reality fields, returns fragmented, uh, conflicting experiences, confirming the self's structure. So, okay, so like I said, in this particular material, I don't really talk a lot about manifestation. I don't rule it out, and I don't discourage people from that thought process or whatever, but I just don't really, I don't, that's not a focal point on it. I think there's always this conversation about free will and determinism and stuff like that. And I think this is an aspect of the reconciling idea, because I think free will is going to be limited by your predisposition to certain thematic stimulus, if that makes any sense. When we talk about acausal connections and everything like that, astrology, your natal chart and everything in your natal chart, those would be acausal connections that will predispose you to certain particular types of behavior or what have you. You see what I'm saying? So, not saying that you can't overcome that with an act of will, but it would be substantially harder. You would probably have to work with the strengths and weaknesses more so than trying to struggle against your strengths and weaknesses. That's why I say people are like snowflakes, and all of us have our particular batch of strengths and weaknesses. What I am strong at, you may not be strong at. What you're strong at, you might, like you might do it with no effort. You see what I'm saying? Uh, versus I might struggle with it. You see what I'm saying? So we all have our own strengths and weaknesses or what have you. So um, manifestation and canonian causality in the closed loop system. The bioetheric feedback loop provides a physical mechanism for metaphysical concepts of manifestation, specifically canonian causality. We talked about that by translating psychological tension into measurable etheric deformation, right? So we talked about that on many different levels um, over in these videos. We talked about it on a martial arts level, in a fight. We talked about it, situations with your car breaking down. I remember I was telling you, Naju was the first person I ever seen to see a common mundane problem, like a person having a issue with their car or something like that, and he'll get a divinatory meaning out of that because you understand how the theme and the a causal connections work and everything like that. Dolores Cannon has information. She did a lot of work with hypnosis and stuff like that. She has a lot of stuff. She talks about how psychological issues that a person goes through it can affect that person's health. It can manifest as certain health issues. We talked about that in our video on marma points and acupressure points. So just kind of getting into that whole thing as we touch on the Canonian causality, right? So Canonian causality as local field perturbation. Anytime you hear the word perturbation, think it's a disturbance in the force, right? Okay, so translating psychological issues into etheric torsion. Canonian causality suggests that unresolved psychological issues, conflicts, predispose individuals to select or encounter stressful life events that reinforce those internal states. In the bioetheric feedback loop model, psychological conflict is redefined as persistent electrical instability. Unresolved issues are modeled as etheric torsion, like we talked about previously, a self-sustaining, non-harmonic, destructive interference pattern superimposed upon the core, stable soul vortex etheric blueprint. All right. Um, so this is you changing the blueprint, right? This persistent torsion creates an electrical imbalance that the physical system must energetically reconcile. So it's always seeking balance. It's self-repairing. So most of the stuff that we seen that this thing does, this thing meaning the fabric of reality, we're composed of this thing. We are this thing. So most of the most of the things that the fabric of reality does, an aspect of it is self-repair, self-assembly, self-healing. This is another manifestation of that, apparently. This persistent torsion creates an electrical imbalance that the physical system must energetically reconcile, as matter is defined by motion. Torsion. Remember, we were talking about the black dot, and we talked about the Lord Kelvin vortex model. You see what I'm saying? The dot is at the center of the vortex. The vortex is centrifugal, and stuff like that. Remember, we talk about prana. Prana is perceived of as motion within the akasha. The vortex is a motion. You see what I'm saying? So that I just making the correlations. The system resolves the internal torsion by restructuring the lowest resistance path, right? Then we say principles manifest patterns through the path of least resistance, like lightning. That's why on the cover of True Master Volume 1, Self to Self, you see some lightning striking and stuff like that, because principles manifest through the path of least resistance. So as 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 matter is defined by motion, torsion within the ether, the system resolves this internal tension by restructuring the lowest resistance path, which often involved externalizing the incoherence. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. Murphy's Law. Ain't that right? The internal etheric torsion is projected outward and manifests externally as circumstantial events, the language of situations, like Brother Asar been saying for 6 years. The stressful life event that appears to justify and reinforce the original internal psychological state, thereby completing the destructive, self-reinforcing causal loop, right? The manifestation mechanism, shaping local reality. The manifestation sequence begins with the broadcasting of the incoherent etheric torsion signal via the mitochondrial DNA fractal antenna. You see what I'm saying? Because like how we talked about on previous videos, it's a difference between nuclear DNA and mitochondrial DNA. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. We liken that to midi-chlorians in Star Wars. That's what allows them to sense the force and everything like that. So you have the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, mitochondrial DNA, which resides in that. Mitochondrial DNA does not have the ability to repair itself the same as nuclear DNA. It relies on connection to the blueprint or what have you. So mitochondrial DNA fractal antenna and its powerful conduction and amplification through the melanin fascia network. Okay, this structured incoherence induces immediate field fluctuations in the local ether, restructuring in localized probability matrix of the external events. The observation that depressive symptoms in residence can contribute to the decay of neighborhood conditions, such as property abandonment, abandonment serves as a clinical example of Canonian causality operating through the bioetheric feedback loop. The resident's localized etheric torsion, depression, manifests as a failure to maintain coherence in the shared local field, resulting in an external shared breakdown. Yeah, when people are poor, they commit crime, and that's another analogy of what's talked of what this kind of is. The deteriorating physical environment then reinforces the psychological state, demonstrating the dynamic, reciprocal nature of psychoetheric causal web. Correcting Canonian causality requires therapeutically removing internal etheric torsion to restore coherence and stability to the projected field, leading to corresponding shifts in the environmental patterns. Okay, part 5, let's get it. Transcendence, acausal connections, and non-dual synthesis. Okay, the full see, I ain't gotta yell at the I ain't gotta yell at the computer today. We can kick it real professional today. You know what I'm saying? So the full scope of the bioetheric feedback loop is revealed when examining phenomena that challenge the ego's established boundaries, leading toward non-dual realization. Didn't we say that we have a whole video of the survival mechanism of patterns, whatever? Didn't we say we did we on one video we were talking about how Naju says it, not Christ consciousness but consciousness in crisis. The ego tries to protect itself when it sees that you're getting into some non-dualistic type position or whatever. The ego seeks to protect itself. Patterns seek to protect themselves. We talked about that because these are all sentient things. From this framework, we're just not speaking of the sentient nature of them. We're just speaking on it straight up and down from paper. When we get into the experiential and self to self, we speak about them from the perspective of sentient things. Okay, so acausal connection and synchronistic field events. Jungian synchronicity in the ether model. Traditional causality operates strictly within the confines of ego's linear filtering reality, right? Synchronicity, as defined by Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli, is a okay. Now, peep this. Synchronicity, as defined by Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli, is an acausal connecting principle. Synchronicity, events that coincide meaningfully without a discoverable causal link, serving as a philosophical objective connection between psyche and the world, right? That's Carl Jung. In the bioetheric feedback loop framework, synchronicity is explained by leveraging the non-local nature of the ether. It occurs with the localized soul vortex blueprint, achieves a momentary, nonlinear, instantaneous resonance with a meaningful, comprehensive pattern embedded in the universal ether. This phenomenon functions as a fractal aperture, utilizing the inherent self-similar structure of the mitochondrial DNA antenna. The internal psychoetheric state, i.e. thinking of a specific image, instantly matches the external physical pattern, the image's physical manifestation in reality, effectively bypassing the ego's linear processing constraints of space and time. So this is another aspect of this. A lot of these things, when we when we operate in certain capacities, or when we tap into some of these things that don't really seem like much, these events that we write off as coincidence, in a lot of cases those acausal connections are actually bypassing the ego's linear perception of reality and everything like that. So that's a way of the ego protecting itself by writing it off. Like that doesn't exist. But as we can see, according to Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli, this is actually a real thing. So the effect of recognizing a causal connection, waking dream interpretations, like Brother Asar been saying, the conscious recognition and interpretation of synchronistic events analogous to a waking dream is a powerful psychological mechanism because it provides direct, undeniable evidence. Remember, we talked about when the left brain, the logical mind, has to bear witness to something that should not be, and is forced to bear witness to that, or whatever. It creates this third state, which we've referred to. Brother Naju calls it a psychoactive state. You see what I'm saying? Um, okay. Um, Analogous to a waking dream is a powerful psychological mechanism because it provides direct, undeniable evidence that the subject's internal field structure is isomorphic with the external environment. This realization directly contradicts the ego's foundational function. The function is to be the bridge, the resistor, maintaining the subject-object distinction, impedance. Synchronicity is a direct validation of the bioetheric reflection principle. Synchronicity, what Carl Jung was talking about in the acausal context. This existential shock constitutes a ego boundary collapse. Now, didn't Brother Saul was kind of explaining about you know reflections collapse the subject object divide. Okay, ego bound the reflections, as in the divination technique used by the experiential ego boundary collapse, causing a transient but profound reduction in the ego's electrical impedance layer. This temporary influx of non-dual information is experienced as profound, meaningful, enhancing consciousness and promoting psychological resilience. The individual focus shifts focus from localized linear survival strategies toward a recognition of a deep acausal pattern making universe. A whole other layer of the universe opens up that's non-linear. That's not like how we see it. I think in the volume one of True Master, it's a section in the book called A Whole New World Revealed. This is what I'm talking about. Welcome to the whole new world. Okay, so solipsism in contrast to non-dual synthesis. We talked about that a little bit earlier. We're gonna tap back into it real quick, and then we're gonna get into the benediction, the conclusion of this whole thing. So our hearts and minds can be clear. You dig it? Okay, so solipsism in contrast to non-dual synthesis. Solipsism, the belief that only the individual consciousness truly exists and others are mere projections, individually approaches the subject-object unity but fails to transcend the boundary. So when we're getting into all this, that's kind of why some of the material been kind of slow rolling it or whatever, because certain things can be taken out of context, and I would rather um, be responsible with this type of stuff rather than to create some monsters, because this stuff right here can create monsters. You see what I'm saying? If it's not given or taught in a particular kind of way. So solipsism is one of the things that you can slip into if this material is not taken in its proper context. So solipsism, the belief that only the individual consciousness truly exists and that others. So when I say it's only one thing, this is a common misinterpretation of that. Solipsism, the belief that only the individual consciousness truly exists and that others are merely projections, intellectually approaches the subject-object unity but fails to transcend the boundary. The Bio-Aetheric feedback loop model, solipsism is a maximum distortion state of the ego. We said that it occurs when the ego's impedance layer achieves near infinite electrical resistance, resulting in perfect self-confinement. The localized electrical vortex successfully isolates itself and makes its internal boundary field structure for the totality of the infinite universal ether akasha. Solipsism is therefore not transcendence, but rather the perfect subject-object divide. The perfect subject-object divide. So then we just say, um, you know what I'm saying, the ego perceives itself. So honestly, if we go back and you examine how we talked about the ego kind of like coincides with the whole idea of the demiurge in Gnostic theology. You see what I'm saying? The demiurge thought that it was the only thing or whatever case may be, and it ignored the greater aspect. Remember, we said the demiurge is emblematic of the ego and everything like that. So that's a good analogy. Non-dual realization as vortex, dissolution, and integration. Non-dual realization is the profound understanding that there is no separate perceiving self. No separate perceiving self distinct from the perceived phenomena. The perceiver of the phenomena and the phenomena are the same thing, right? The phenomenon reflects the uh, signature or the resonance of the perceiver, basically. And that goes back into the whole idea of particle wave duality. Like I said, according to this framework, many people who deal with etheric level physics, they really don't deal with the particle wave duality. They have another idea for that, but for the sake of this conversation, the lines of identity dissolve into pure awareness beyond identity. Electrodynamically, this represents the permanent cessation of the ego's dielectric impedance, resistance, a state of zero resistance. The localized electrical vortex, the soul, the blueprint, achieves full etheric continuity, recognizing its intrinsic nature as a coherent standing wave within the universal ether. The perception shifts from the localized structure to the infinite field, enabling experiences of oneness and timelessness. In this state, the mitochondrial DNA fractal antenna transitions from a frequency filter to pure conduit, from a frequency filter to a pure conduit, processing universal information without constraint of subjective separation. Right? Okay, so let me make sure I'm still rolling. Rolling. All right. So synthesis, psychoetheric configuration of consciousness states. All right. Let's see here. I'm not gonna rehash that. Okay. In conclusion, the bioetheric feedback loop framework posits that consciousness is an electrical phenomenon, right? Defined by the dynamic tension between the infinite coherence of the universal ether and the boundary constraints of the localized biological matter, right? The soul is a stable etheric vortex, how we talked about a la Tesla and the Akashic model. Its blueprint communicated to the physical body via the mitochondrial DNA fractal antenna and sustained throughout the organism by the melanin fascia hybrid conductor network. You see what I'm saying? Basically, as well as this whole electrical system that Robert Becker discovered. The ego functions as a dielectric impedance layer necessary for the experience of subject-object dualism and linear survival, right? Um, Psychological health is thus a matter of electrical field coherence, management, dysfunction. Management. Dysfunction exemplified by Canonian causality arises from self-sustaining internal incoherence, etheric torsion that is projected outward and reinforced through the bioetheric feedback loop as destructive external events, right? Just like how we talked about the language of situations, therapeutic implications for psychological coherence. The bioetheric feedback loop model translates psychological healing into electrodynamic field correction. Correcting Canonian causality requires therapeutic intervention designed to reduce etheric torsion. You see what I'm saying? Tension, discord, that type of thing. This includes technologies such as microcurrent therapies based on Becker's DC stimulation research or meditative techniques that promote neural and biofield coherence, allowing the localized electrical vortex to shed dissonant patterns and restore fidelity to the original soul blueprint, right? Furthermore, leveraging the mechanism of acausal connection recognition similar to waking dream interpretation, the mean meaning exercise, like we talked about, is crucial. By consciously identifying synchronistic events, the subject actively validates the underlying unity of the field, therapeutically reducing the ego's impedance layer and enhancing consciousness and resilience by incorporating transpersonal perspectives. Yeah. All right. All right. So yeah, just wanted to get into that. That's pretty much what I had on that. I appreciate y'all time, y'all patience, y'all attention, y'all coherence on this video. I know it got kind of wordy, nerdy, but that goes back into what we've talked about on previous episodes. That bleeds heavily into the self-to-self material or whatever case may be. This is the reflection principle as mentioned in Others to Self. This is what it looks like on paper. But as you can see, as we start explaining this thing, the reflection principle and everything like that, to fully flesh it out, I have to go back into the self to self portion to add in the little nuance pieces about how about it being sentient and sentient aspect of consciousness and everything like that. Um, Go back into that playlist, deeper dives or whatever, and I talk about it from the self to self, more experiential type perspective, and you kind of see it differently, how it plays out in our everyday lives. So that's pretty much what I had. That's just kind of revisiting this. It's my intention for this video to probably air around November 9th, something like that. So y'all should be good in Mercury retrograde. So this will be a good opportunity for you to revisit some of the other videos, like in the self to self playlist. I know in the self to self section of True Master, because I know we've been going hard on this others to self, making that playlist spit like bone. I'm talking about bone, 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 bone. So I appreciate y'all patience and I don't know, just attention span, just paying attention to some of this more nuanced information. Appreciate y'all. Got some more stuff coming up. Probably the next book project will be that Electric Soul in book form. So y'all stay tuned. Appreciate that. Appreciate all the love, support, peace and blessings. Peace to the gods. Yeah.